Hey there, so it's been a while since we've had the chance to really sit down and just talk about knitting and yarn and what I've been making and what I've been weaving and all that kind of stuff. So I thought today I would catch you guys up on sort of what I've been working on. But I do want to talk to you guys about time, my relationship with time, and how it has both literally and physically hurt me. Hey there, thank you so much for being here. My name is Felicia from SweetGeorgia, and this is Taking Back Friday. This is a space where I come usually almost every Friday, and I talk about making things. I talk about making time to make things. Now, let me tell you a little bit about why there was no video last Friday. So last Friday in the morning, I had we launched and we published our little video about the spring and summer preview. So we showed you all the yarns and all that kind of stuff. That published at the same time as that was publishing. I was recording my School of Sweet Georgia live office hour segment. So I was doing that. And so that goes on usually for about an hour. So I talk from about 10 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock. And once that's done, I need to sort of catch up on email and catch up on a whole bunch of things. And so with all the catching up, I didn't really stop to have lunch until later on in the afternoon. Now, I'd gone to the fridge a couple of times in the morning to sort of, get coffee, like milk for the coffee and those kinds of things. And our fridge, the fridge door handle has been loose for some time now. You know, it's just something that needs a little Allen key and you go twist it and then the whole thing is solid again. But it was just really loose for like a couple of days. And then that morning, I pulled the handle and it came off the fridge, like the door handle came off the fridge. And it happened one time and I was like, oh, this is super annoying. And I said, I don't have time to fix this right now. So I put it back and then it happened again a second time because I forget. So I opening the fridge door and you have to overcome that suction to open the fridge door. And so I'm pulling on the door handle, the handle comes off again. I'm like, again, I said to myself, I don't have time to fix this right now. I'm just gonna deal with it later. So I just kind of hook it back onto the fridge door. And then probably about 2 o'clock in the afternoon when I finally decided to stop and have lunch, I'd completely forgotten all these things. I'm thinking about lots of other things. Go to the fridge door, pull on the fridge door, pull on that handle to open the door. And of course, I pull it so hard, it hits me right in the face and cuts me right here above my lip. And it was not good. There was a lot of blood. I was going into shock. There was a bit of that kind of thing happening. But when I look back, it's entirely my fault because I was telling myself, I don't have time to fix that. I don't have time to deal with this right now. I don't have time. I just got to keep going. I just got to keep going. And I know that that's a thing for me because that sort of mentality seeps into sort of everything that I do. This feeling like I just don't have enough time. I don't have enough time to do all the things that I need to do. And so it happened almost with this sweater. I know some of you guys were asking about seeing more of this sweater. I'd shown it kind of very briefly a couple of weeks ago, but this is the finished sailing sweater that I made. And this is the second time that I had started it. If you sort of follow along with that story through all of the Taking Back Friday episodes, when I first started this, it was around the weekend of our retreat, our Sweet Georgia retreat in Whistler. And I started knitting it and it was all good. But having conversations with Tabitha, our design director, about how I should have really, made a gauge swatch and how I didn't make a gauge swatch and how that might, become a problem later on if I hadn't made a gauge swatch to double check that I'm knitting at the right gauge. And so during that weekend, I stopped and I paused and I thought about it and I reflected back on the sweaters that I had made with this particular yarn, and I decided to rip out the whole thing and start again because I didn't want to make that mistake that I had done before. And I'll show you my mistake. So this yarn for the sweater is knit in the Sweet Georgia Mohair Silk DK. This is one of my absolute most favorite yarns. I've made it into sweaters. I've woven things with it. Like, I love this yarn. It feels good. It's shiny, but not too shiny. And it's got like a good weight. It's squishy. I love this yarn. I had made this sweater, this is the Jennifer Steingass sweater. This one, I think, I can't remember what it's called. I'll have to look up what it's called and I'll put it in the notes below. I always link what I've knit in the description below. So if any time you have a question about the sweaters or anything that we're showing, I always link it below. But this sweater I knit out of the mohair silk DK and I loved it. It's a great sort of weight of fabric and everything. And then I knit this one. This is Hohi's Boxy, the worsted Boxy. And again, I love this sweater. I love the feel of it. It's silky and it feels drapey, but because it was knit at a slightly larger gauge with like slightly larger needles, it became more and more and more drapey and then started to stretch out more than I had expected. And so what I needed to do was I needed to understand the nature of this yarn and how it was going to react and how it was going to do things. And so you can see here, it's not even like a sweater anymore. It's become a little bit like a dress. I still wear it, but it feels more like a dress than a sweater. Yeah, so what I did was that weekend of the retreat, I measured the gauge of this fabric based on, what needle size I used for the yarn. And then I went back and I measured the gauge for this sweater. And again, this is a smaller needle size, same yarn, smaller needle size. And so I was able to figure out where I needed the gauge to be and therefore which needle size to actually use. And so I did have to rip out this sweater and reknit it with a smaller needle size in order to prevent it from being a sweater that was gonna grow and stretch and become too big. So this is what I have done for this particular one in order to prevent that problem. So yeah, you have to kind of think about, if I hadn't done that gauge swatch, I would have a sweater that wouldn't necessarily fit anymore. It wouldn't necessarily be the right thing for me anymore. And it's all because of that one split second where you make the decision to fix something before it becomes a problem. Like I should have fixed the fridge before it became a problem that hit me in the face. And that's why there was no video, because the rest of the day I was all covered up in steri strips for like several days after that. Yeah. So I have learned my lesson, I think, about trying to make sure that I am more conscientious about doing the things that need to get done and not thinking that everything is going to take too long in order to do properly. The same thing happened when I was working on this project for the loom. Like, I don't know if you can barely see it, but this project that's on the loom right now, this is a project that I'm weaving for the hand woven color course for the School of SweetGeorgia. So I've previously woven things on this loom. I have it threaded. It's threaded for 252 ends across. So basically there's 252 threads, individual warp threads coming through all of these heddles. They've all been threaded, coming through the reed and to the front here. And the way that I wanted to make this particular cloth was to use those 252 ends, but compress them into a smaller space. So I'm sort of like pushed all the warp threads together, made them a little bit more compact, more dense by slaying 2 threads in each slot for this reed. So that basically goes from a 10 ends per inch project to a 20 ends per inch project, making it half the width of a project. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So this is the previous project that was on the loom. I was taking advantage of almost the full width of the loom. So it's about 26 inches, 25 inches weaving width across. So this is what was on the loom before. And then when I cut it off, I took all of these ends, tied them to a new warp, and then made that new warp more dense. And so the fabric that I'm weaving right now here on the loom is about half the width. It'll be about half the width, you can see here. So as I was doing that, in order to make the color design that I'm making, I hold together multiple warp colors together at the same time. So I hold together 4 ends together. So, if you have to wind 252 ends, I'm not carrying one thread and winding it 252 times on the warping board. I'm holding 4 ends at a time and winding it on the warping board, theoretically cutting your time in 4. So you save, you save all that time. But then afterwards, when you tie onto the front here, and then I'm trying to pull them through the reed, the 4 that you've sort of held together in a bundle, they sort of twist on each other and all these kinds of things. And so they cause tangles and snags here at the reed. And that takes time to clear as well. So, you think that you're saving time up front, but maybe you're causing more problems and not resolving your situation until later. So, I mean, holding your 4 ends or 6 ends or 10 ends together is totally fine if you're going to make a warp, but if you're going to do something like rough slaying it, or if you're going to beam it, like put it in a rattle and then beam it before you actually, you know, bring all the threads forward and through the reed and all this kind of stuff. But if you're taking these bundles of warp ends and trying to force them through the reed this way, then you're gonna cause some problems. So that is what I have been thinking about most recently, about, you know, these things that we're doing with the fiber arts. They do take a long time. This is making slow cloth. This is a slow process that involves a lot of steps along the way, a lot of tiny little steps. A lot of decisions have to be made at each of those steps to do things properly, to do things correctly, to do things in the best possible way, just being really conscientious about every step that you're making and not sort of taking any shortcuts or things like that. So I think this year I have learned my lesson about knitting gauge swatches. I think that's a good idea now. I think I can thank Tabitha for that. I believe that that's a good idea. She's actually, because we talk about this gauge issue so much, she felt very compelled to put together a workshop for the school about knitting gauge and stuff like that. So that's going to come up later on, maybe in a couple months or so. But that's going to come out, and it's all because we have all these conversations about gauge, and a lot of the knitters that we know in the community also have questions about gauge. You know, how much yarn gets used up? How do you save yarn? How can you go down a needle size? All these things she's going to talk about. So that's that. This weaving thing is basically all done. I'm at the end of my warp already, so the knots that I've all tied are all coming around the back beam now, and so it's time to put something new on the loom. And so the new thing that's going to go on the loom might possibly be the sea silk lace scarf that I'm trying to put together. So I have 3 skeins here of the sea silk lace. Originally it was just going to be 2 skeins to make a scarf, but I think that might make too skinny of a scarf. I might do something that involves all 3 of these colors together. So that is something that either will go on this loom, more likely will go on the upstairs Louette spring loom. And I can tell you why it can go on the big spring loom, the big Louette loom upstairs in the attic, is because I have finished that epic cloth project. It came off the loom a couple days ago, and I'll show you the whole thing in its entirety. So this is the end that I've woven, and it just keeps going. Let's see, I'll show you the front side. This side, and there's more, and there's more, and there's more, and more, and more, and more. And so this whole thing, this is my epic cloth project that I made for almost all of 2019. If you want to follow along with that, there's a whole thing about that. And we made a workshop, I made a workbook on how to break down your big idea for something that you want to make. Break it down into multiple tiny little steps that you can actually achieve. And so that's what I made through my process for the Epic Cloth Challenge process for all of 2019. What I had in mind was cloth that had been made with hand-dyed warp, and then to use a weft that would sort of interlace with those hand-dyed warp threads and create somewhat of a new color in between. So I wanted that. It took some time to figure out what density or what set I needed to set all of those warp threads at, so that took extra time. The actual dyeing took time for sure. The threading process, all of that stuff took time, and I'm glad that once I first sort of put this whole thing on the loom, the first time I started weaving a couple of inches, and I decided I didn't like the density that it was coming up at. I didn't like the set, and so I sort of basically untied it all, unwove it all, and then I reslayed it, made it more compact, more dense, and then started again from the beginning, just weaving it again from the very beginning. And I'm glad that I stopped and I corrected myself at that point in time, because I do love the fabric that's been made here. You can kind of very slightly see the weft color that's in here. The weft color is lupine. It's like a purplish blue color. Actually, it's this color. It's this color. This is the color that I used to put into this warp as the weft color. And so, you know, all of those kinds of things take time, but the actual weaving of it takes almost no time. Like, I wove this much yardage in about an hour. So the weaving part goes super quick. So this is like an hour of weaving. That would be like another hour of weaving, and maybe like 3.5 hours of actual weaving. But all of the rest of that time for an entire year was spent thinking about the project, calculating how much yarn, calculating how I was going to weave it and what the dimensions were going to be based on how much yarn I actually had in my stash, taking that yarn, winding the warp, dyeing the warp, threading the loom, just all of those steps. They do take a lot of time. And it's lucky for me that I enjoy all of those steps. So that is all really super fun. But at the end of the day, the weaving process itself goes pretty quick. So I am quite happy with what has come off the loom. I haven't washed it yet. It hasn't been finished in any way. I'm trying to think about whether or not I want to do that or not. Eventually what's gonna happen with this is I'm gonna cut this up into 3 pieces, and I'm gonna stretch them over canvas stretcher frames. So there's going to be kind of like a triptych. So there'll be 3 panels with this fabric covering it, and then I can sort of hang them side by side by side. And so that's what I want to do with them. So if I am just sort of stapling this to a canvas stretcher frame, I don't know if I should or if I need to actually block it or anything. I feel like wet blocking or wet finishing it would help even out any sort of inconsistencies. I think maybe what I should do before I make a mistake is I would probably cut off a section of this, you know, just the end part of this fabric, and I could wash it as a test and see how it performs, see how it changes. Maybe it shrinks a little bit, maybe it tucks in a little bit. And so I could do all that as a test before I go and do the rest of it. That seems like a good thing to do. So I think that that is about it for this week. I haven't been doing very much knitting at all. My life has just been really, really, really busy lately, and I haven't really felt that much like concentrating on figuring out new brioche stitches just yet. I have been doing a bunch of spinning, and I'll talk about that in the coming week or so. But yeah, not a lot has been happening in the knitting side of things. I'm thinking a lot about weaving projects and what I'm making for the school, and so there's a lot of stuff going on around that right now, for sure. So, yeah, so I'm curious about if you guys made an epic cloth project last year. I'd love to hear about what your process was like, if you managed to finish, if you found any challenges. I'd love also to hear about any lessons that you have learned in the past year or so. Like, what have been lessons that you've learned that you will never make these mistakes again in the future? For me, I think I'm very, very much cognizant about how much I worry about the lack of time and how I really should slow down in a lot of ways and just believe that the time will be there. You know, the weaving process doesn't actually take that long. All of these other steps, you want to do them consistently, you want to do them properly, you want to do them well. Same with knitting. Everything that you're doing, you want to do them well. It's the same as what we talked about, like with the hand-dyed yarns a couple of weeks ago, the fear of hand-dyed yarns. You know, if you're gonna make a colorwork project, think about, you know, pre-washing your yarns. It's just about being careful every step of the way, so that way you don't cause yourself a big problem later on at the end of the day. So that's it. That's it for this week. If you guys like this episode, please do hit the like button and let your friends know about what we're doing here. And if you want to see more stuff like this, please do hit subscribe and hit the bell so you'll get notified about when new videos go up, in case they don't go up every single Friday like I would like to. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. All right, bye for now.